And you're live, Clive.
It's 5:05 and welcome into a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We are expecting a busy week in the North Carolina General Assembly as the North Carolina House is set to release its 2025 state budget early this week, with votes anticipated by midweek, so we'll have a lot of progress over the next couple of days. We learned on Friday that House leaders offered House leaders offered a glimpse into their budget's tax priorities, which included two key initiatives aimed at easing financial burdens on North Carolinians. The House budget proposal is set to slash taxes on tips for North Carolina workers. The first $5,000 of tips earned by service industry workers, such as servers and bartenders, will be exempt from state income tax. The North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association expressed support for the no tax on tips policy as a way to acknowledge the hard work of hospitality workers and ensure that they keep more of their earnings. Obviously, the no tax on tips has been a major national discussion. It did become a campaign talking point for not only President Donald Trump, but also Vice President Kamala Harris in the final days and weeks of the 2024 presidential election. Obviously, as it relates to no tax on tips, that would just be your North Carolina income tax. The first $5,000 is what the House budget lays out. Another initiative that would be included in the House proposal would reinstate the back-to-school sales tax holiday. The tax-free weekend would allow families to purchase school supplies, clothing, and other essentials without sales tax starting in 2026. That would help reduce costs for parents and students. The North Carolina Retail Merchants Association condoned the efforts as a win for families and for resellers. House Speaker Destin Hall, the Republican out of Caldwell County, with the preview of the budget saying, quote, "The House budget reflects the priorities of everyday North Carolinians. We're cutting taxes when it counts and restoring policies that drive real relief to hardworking families. This includes eliminating taxes on tips, just like President Trump's America First agenda. We're putting workers first and making sure that they keep more of what they earn." Though the House has pointed just to a few economic commitments that will be released in the budget this week, experts are hesitant to choose the House's initial proposal over the Senate's extensive tax cuts. Over the last couple of weeks, we have been providing additional details on the Senate's budget proposal, which continues reductions of the state's personal income tax as well as the state's franchise tax. According to Brian Balfour, the vice president of research at the John Locke Foundation, he says, quote, "While it's encouraging to see the House recognizing tax cuts as being helpful to North Carolina families, if these very targeted tax cuts are in lieu of across-the-board tax cuts that are included in the Senate budget, then budget writers should support the Senate's tax reform. Sound tax policy includes the principles of simplicity and equal treatment, both of which are not followed by the House's tax plan. Providing relief to all North Carolina families and households would be a better alternative than further carving up the state's tax code for specific businesses and sectors." Ending quote there from Brian Balfour. With the House budget release imminent, we will again learn details about that. Could be as soon as today or tomorrow. Leaders have shared teaser videos online that follows the Senate GOP's passage of its own budget approximately 1 month ago, setting up the stage for negotiations between the two chambers to take place through the month of June. The attention will soon shift to negotiations with the Senate as that reconciliation process will take place, and we will learn details as to what the state's fiscal plan for the 25-26 biennium will look like. That is going to be one of our main stories this week. We'll keep an eye on it, not only on our website, carolinajournal.com, but right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Turning our attention to some federal news this morning, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, announced last week that it intends to ease restrictions on certain forever chemicals in drinking water that were finalized last year. This is while keeping existing limits for two of the most common ones. We've got a flashback to April of last year. That's when EPA Administrator Michael Regan, who was previously the head of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, announced the first federal drinking water limits on PFAS substances. Now, with changes in Washington, D.C., EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin reported the changes as an opportunity to allow additional time for water systems to meet some standards. Lee Zeldin said in a press release, quote, "We will work to provide common sense flexibility in the form of additional time for compliance. This will support water systems across the country, including small systems in rural communities, as they work to address these contaminants. EPA will also continue to use its regulatory and enforcement tools to hold polluters accountable," end quote there from EPA Administrator Zeldin. Under the previous rule, water systems were required to test for PFOA, PFOSs, PFNAs, PFHXSs, and HFPODAs. Those were the 5 kinds of forever chemicals within 3 years and notify the public of those PFAS levels. If levels were higher than the standard that was put forward by EPA, then those water systems were required to install PFAS treatment systems by 2029. The new proposal allows public drinking water systems more time to come up with plans to address PFOAs and PFOSs. Those are the 2 compounds that are staying the same in their limits, extending the date to comply with those rules to 2031. It would also rescind the regulation and reconsider the standards for the 3 other chemical compounds that I just mentioned. EPA is planning to issue a proposed rule on those chemicals in the fall of this year, so coming up here in just a couple of months, and finalize it by the spring of 2026. Administrator Zeldin said, quote, "We are on the path to uphold the agency's nationwide standards to protect Americans from PFOAs and PFOSs in their water." Now, it's important to note that PFAS, or forever chemicals, have been linked to serious health risks, including cancer, liver damage, immune system dysfunction, and developmental issues within children. In response to growing concerns about contaminants in the state's river, as we've covered over the last week or so, lawmakers in both chambers of the North Carolina General Assembly have been grappling with how best to address some of these issues. They are looking at a variety of pieces of legislation to hold polluters accountable and deal with contaminated water. The largest discussion really has consisted in southeastern North Carolina, where Gen X, which is a nickname for one of the forever chemicals, has been a major news story going on a decade, with many public utilities investing tens, if not hundreds, of millions of dollars worth of ratepayer funds into addressing the contaminants and various sorts of filtration, whether that be low pressure reverse osmosis, granular activated carbon. It has been a big issue in the southeastern portion of the state for quite some time. With the announcement last week, the EPA said it will also be launching a campaign called PFAS Out. The goal of that group is to connect with public water utilities to address the chemicals that are in drinking water systems all across the United States. We do have a link to the full EPA press release this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com. The headline, "EPA adjusts PFAS water standards, pledges to hold polluters accountable." You can read some additional details there. Where it's now 5:13, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get a look at the roadways on a Monday morning commute. A look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon. It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Monday morning to you. As I was mentioning in the previous segment, we are expecting a busy week here coming up in the North Carolina General Assembly. Not only are we expecting additional details coming out of the North Carolina House as it relates to their 25-26 budget, but we are also going to be taking a look at many pieces of legislation that made the crossover deadline. That happened just a couple of weeks ago, meaning that any pieces of legislation that were set to move forward in the biennium, both in this legislative session and in next year's, that those would have already had to made their way to either the House or the Senate floor for a vote. Many pieces of legislation, hundreds of pieces, made that crossover deadline. There is set to be plenty of various committee meetings taking place, not necessarily today, but as we head into tomorrow and Wednesday, many of those meetings taking place, many of those pieces of legislation being discussed. We will keep a very close eye on those over on our website, carolinajournal.com, and right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:21, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are tracking a very interesting legal story out of Jacksonville, North Carolina, as it relates to food trucks. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us with details this morning. Mitch, food trucks are a very popular thing. You pretty much can't escape a food truck rodeo or some sort of event taking place all across North Carolina every weekend. What's the battle between a food truck operator and the city of Jacksonville, North Carolina looking like?
Well, you're right that food trucks are popular. Not so, though, with the city government in Jacksonville. The city has a number of food truck regulations that essentially shut down most of the city for being available for food trucks. According to a lawsuit that was filed, something like 96% of the city is off limits because of these regulations. So a business property owner who would like to host food trucks and two food truck owners are the plaintiffs in a suit working with the group Institute for Justice, challenging these food truck regulations. Now, at the lower court levels, their ideas had been thrown out, but the State Court of Appeals ruled late last year that this lawsuit could move forward because the plaintiffs in the case are making a legitimate claim that their rights are being violated by these restrictions. And the latest development, what just came down within the past week, was that an Onslow County Superior Court judge did grant a preliminary injunction blocking the signage restrictions that Jacksonville has on food trucks. So one of the rules is that the signs can only be a certain size and they have to be very close to the actual food truck. And so it really doesn't help the food truck generate any more business because people who see the sign are probably already seeing the food truck. So the signage restrictions, there's an injunction against those restrictions as this suit plays out. The Institute for Justice publicized that development, saying this is a positive step. It's going to be a good sign for the plaintiffs as they're moving forward. But they will continue through the court process to try to strike down some of these other regulations, probably the most important of which is the one that says you can't operate a food truck within, I believe it's 250 feet of another food truck, a restaurant, another business, residential area. So because of all those restrictions of where you can have a food truck, that's why most of the city of Jacksonville is off limits. And one of the big arguments that IJ has been making in its legal filings in this case is that this is really not designed to protect anyone's health and safety. It's really designed to protect brick and mortar restaurants. And then if you look at the history of how these regulations were enacted, you could find that that's exactly what the people who put the restrictions in place were saying, was that they wanted to protect brick and mortar restaurants from the competition. And so the argument is this is an unfair and illegal and unconstitutional restraint of people's ability to make money from their business, make money from their livelihood, and that Jacksonville should strike these restrictions down.
And Mitch, not taking a side on this, but I guess I can understand the point from a business owner. You invest in a physical storefront for your restaurant, the expense of running and operating that restaurant versus somebody that purchases either a used or new truck and converts it into some sort of kitchen. There's a very significant difference in price in all of that. But these practices coming out of the city of Jacksonville seem almost absurd as it relates to individuals being able to go out and earn a living and profit off of something that they're selling.
Well, that's certainly the argument that the plaintiffs are making in this case, is that if Jacksonville had some sort of regulations that seemed to be applicable to lots of businesses and they also ended up affecting food trucks, that would be one thing. But to have restrictions and regulations put in place that basically put food trucks out of business in most of the city, that is another thing. And that seems to be, from the vantage point of the plaintiffs in this case, as endorsed by the ruling that came out from the Court of Appeals, a legitimate concern about what Jacksonville is doing here. And back to your point about the brick and mortar restaurants, yes, I mean, they are the ones who will be hurt most by food truck businesses, but that's competition. If they don't like the competition from the food trucks, they can come up with some other way within their business that will get people to continue going to the restaurants. Remember that what we're talking about here is what's best for the consumer, not what's best for the entrenched business interest that's already in Jacksonville.
And Mitch, from my understanding of this case, this is also affecting businesses. A lot of bars and breweries do not offer food services. Many of them invite these food trucks onto their property to give their customers that are drinking at their bar or brewery some ability to eat some food. And because of this, they're not allowed to do that either. So I can only imagine that might be carving into some of their business as well.
That's right. And that's because of the restrictions of where you can have a food truck. So if you can't have one food truck within a certain square foot or certain distance of another food truck, that certainly limits having multiple food trucks in one location. Also, if your bar, in your example, is close to a restaurant and you wanted to have a food truck option for the people who don't want to go to that restaurant, you can't put the food truck very close to that restaurant, even if it's right next door to the bar on the property of your bar. In fact, we mentioned earlier, one of the plaintiffs in this case is not a food truck owner. There are two food truck owners who are plaintiffs, but the other one is a business property owner that has zoning that would allow for a food truck, but because of the restrictions on where he could put a food truck, how close it could be to other businesses, that business property owner can't have a food truck on her property, even though she would like to do so. That's why she's a plaintiff in this case. And that's why the lawyers from the Institute for Justice are arguing that Jacksonville's rules are way too onerous and that they ought to be struck down.
It's a very interesting legal update this morning. We appreciate it. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:28, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at the roadways this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. We're pretty good.
It's 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We were talking earlier in the show about PFAS and some potential changes as it relates to the Environmental Protection Agency and PFAS mitigation across the United States. This has an impact on the beer industry in some parts of North Carolina as they contain a higher level of forever chemicals due to contaminated water near the Cape Fear River Basin. All this data is according to a recent report study conducted by the Research Triangle Institute, or RTI. The two beers with the highest variety of PFAS were from the upper Cape Fear River Basin in Chatham and Alamance counties, where the Haw River's surface water exhibits greater PFAS type of variability and higher concentrations. According to Jennifer Redman, who is the lead study researcher and senior director of environmental health and water quality at RTI, said, quote, "As an occasional beer drinker myself, I wondered whether PFAS in the water supply was making its way into our pints. Our research shows that PFAS in water supplies has trickle-down effects on what is in our beverages, and I hope these findings support treatment strategies and policies so future happy hours are also a relatively healthier one." PFAS were detected in most beers, particularly from smaller breweries near contaminated water sources. RTI International outlined in a press release the study published in April is titled "Hold My Beer: The Linkage Between Municipal Water and Brewing." Forever chemicals, also known as PFAS, are used in products such as water-resistant clothing, shampoo, and nonstick cookware for their powerful hydrogen-carbon fluoride bonds, which are almost impossible to break. With PFAS being linked to serious health risks like cancer and developmental issues, recent legislative efforts have sought to fund further research for testing and water treatment. In the new report, researchers examined how PFAS-contaminated water sources, such as the Cape Fear River Basin, ended up in beverages like beer, which contains water as the main component. The findings ultimately showed a link between PFAS level in beer and the brewery's water source. Obviously, no real surprise there if the water that is being used in the brewing process is of that has a high level of PFAS concentration, well, then we would see that. Researchers purchased 23 canned beer types in North Carolina stores in August of 2021 and ran analysis on them for their long and short chain PFAS compounds. The study found that beers with the highest number of different PFAS detected were produced within the Cape Fear River Basin, which has become a PFAS hotspot due to industry activity. North Carolina beer typically showed more PFAS compound than beers from Michigan or California. Those other states were examined in the study as well and do have their own issues as it relates to contaminated water. In particular, Chatham and Alamance counties located in the upper Cape Fear River Basin along the Haw River showed significant variables and higher concentration of PFAS in some of those surface water. Redmond told the Carolina Journal that consumers can reduce their potential exposure to PFAS in beer and other beverages by taking several steps. She noted that they can check water quality reports from local public water utilities to assess PFAS levels, select beer from regions with some of those lower PFAS preferences, drink in moderation, and stay informed about treatment updates for municipal water or beverage source water. For water supplies with PFAS, this means filtering water at treatment plants or at the brewery. Additionally, preventing PFAS from entering the water supply would reduce the likelihood of those PFAS in the future. The Carolina Journal did reach out to the North Carolina Craft Brewers Guild, but did not receive a response when this story was published last week. Over the last couple of months, lawmakers in the North Carolina House and Senate have continued grappling with how to respond to PFAS contamination in the state's various river basins. The Senate's latest budget proposal takes a step towards addressing some of those issues in the state legislature, including more than $110 million over the two-year biennium to create a PFAS mitigation fund. The budget also allocates some $6 million over the biennium to the North Carolina Collaboratory at UNC Chapel Hill for some continued research on those forever chemicals. Though the House has not yet released its budget proposal, House committees have recently heard from experts on the impacts of PFAS. Legislators discussed House Bill 569, titled the PFAS Pollution and Polluter Liability Bill. That legislation would address contamination into water sources that go into public utilities. Legislators have also been briefed on new technology from a Burlington, North Carolina-based company to eliminate PFAS in water supplies as well. Those efforts remain pending in the North Carolina General Assembly. So not only are we talking about water as it relates to what's coming out of your tap, but also in various beverages here, especially craft beer that is brewed across the state of North Carolina. We've got some interesting pictures and charts on our website this morning as well. The headline, Study NC Beer Contains Higher Level of PFAS. You can read those details over on our website, carolinajournal.com. In some other statewide news this morning, North Carolinians have long faced frustration with their DMV offices, and government officials are now taking action to address some of those growing complaints. A couple of weeks ago, I introduced you to House Bill 821. That passed the House Rules Committee last week and may soon go to the House floor for a vote. This legislation would give license holders a 2-year grace period to renew their expired licenses to account for the state's holdups at DMV offices. The bill explicitly states, quote, "The General Assembly finds that there is a backlog of drivers unable to renew their driver's licenses in person. It is the intent of this act to eliminate that backlog." Now, it's important to note that in the state already, driver's licenses are generally valid for up to 8 years and can be renewed after their expiration at any DMV office, self-service kiosk, or online. However, the convenience of online renewal is only allowed once every other time, meaning that you get one online renewal per 8-year driver's license. Additionally, online appointments are becoming increasingly unavailable. But you take a look at the DMV schedule, it is often that there is not a single appointment time available in the entire state of North Carolina. In an attempt to cut down on some of those times, DMV announced earlier this year that 42 additional offices across the state would open an hour earlier and extend the previous 8 hours of operation to 10. That announcement was made by then DMV Commissioner Wayne Goodwin, who said in a press release he was, quote, ecstatic about being able to provide additional office hours. However, despite these efforts, Goodwin continued to face criticism from lawmakers. There is now a new head to the North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, and with this legislation, this is just one of the various bills that are making their way through the North Carolina General Assembly. House Bill 821, we will continue to track its progress through the General Assembly and provide details not only here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, but of course on our website, carolinajournal.com, where you can read some additional details. And it's also now 5:44. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at the roadways on your Monday morning. Hopefully a valid driver's license for you, and a look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
You got
Good morning again. It's 5:52. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Turning our attention to some statewide news this morning. Last Thursday, Sam Hayes officially became the executive director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections. He replaced Karen Brinson Bell, whose term expired the same day. Hayes was appointed for a 2-year term by the state board at their meeting that happened back on May the 7th. Before taking this position, Hayes was the general counsel for North Carolina House Speaker Destin Hall after serving as a general counsel for former House Speaker Tim Moore. In that role, he worked on developing election policy and defending election law in the courts. He is an attorney from Kearnsville. Hayes practiced law in Washington, D.C. before returning to North Carolina to serve as general counsel for the Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of the State Treasurer. He said in a press release, quote, "I'd like to thank the state board for this appointment. It's an honor. Managing North Carolina's elections is no easy task, but I have confidence in the capabilities of this office. By building on the foundation of counting votes and following the law, we can be of great service to the people of North Carolina." Board member Stacey Foreggers gave the following statement as well by saying, "Sam Hayes brings a wealth of election and governmental experience to this role. He knows North Carolina and has a firm grip on election administration in our state. I look forward to working alongside him." While Eggers thanked Brinson Bell for her years of service at the meeting earlier this month, he did nominate Hayes as the new executive director. Both incumbent Democrat members both commented on Brinson Bell's accomplishments, saying, quote, "I think this is a shabby way to treat a nationally admired election director, and further the recent habits of changing the executive director when the composition of the election board changes runs counter to our goal of helping bolster people's faith in fair elections." Stacey Eggers pointed out that there was, in fact, very much a clear precedent for changing executive director positions, as when the board composition changed following the election of Governor Roy Cooper. A provision of Senate Bill 382, which became law in December of last year, allowed the state auditor to make new election board appointments and assume administrative oversight of the board. Foreggers nominated Francis DeLuca as the chair over the dissenting vote of the two Democrats on the board. That motion carried, and as we have brought to you many a times, Francis DeLuca is now the chair of that board, and there is now a new executive director in that spot as well. A lot of big questions for the State Board of Elections moving forward. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. As we've been covering this morning, what is set to be a busy week in the North Carolina General Assembly. The North Carolina House is set to release their crack at the state biennium budget sometime early this week and could be voting on it as early as Wednesday or Thursday. We learned on Friday of last week that House leaders offered a glimpse into some of the budget's tax priorities, which included two key initiatives aimed at easing financial burdens for various North Carolinians. The first, following off of a national trend, the House version of the budget would slash taxes on tips for North Carolina workers that are in the service industry, those servers and bartenders. According to details, the first $5,000 of tips earned in those industries would be exempt from state income tax. The North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association expressed support for the no tax on tips policy as a way to acknowledge the hard work of hospitality workers and to ensure that they keep more of their earnings. Another initiative that would be included and is expected to be included in the House proposal will reinstate the back-to-school sales tax holiday. This would be a tax-free weekend before the school year starts that would allow families to purchase school supplies, clothing, and other essentials without sales tax. That would start in 2026. Reducing costs for parents and students. The North Carolina Retail Merchants Association was in favor of these efforts and called it a win for families and retailers. House Speaker Destin Hall, the Republican out of Caldwell County, noted that the House budget reflects the priorities of everyday North Carolinians. He said, quote, "We're cutting taxes where it counts and restoring policies that deliver real relief to hardworking families. This includes eliminating taxes on tips, just like President Donald Trump's agenda. We're putting workers first and making sure that they keep more of what they earn." As we are expecting details on the House budget this week, the two chambers will come together throughout the next couple of months and negotiate the budget, as both the House and the Senate have some different priorities. We will be keeping a very close eye on that right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Well, that's going to do it for a Monday edition. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.